Okay, so we'll go ahead and continue here. And we were just talking about whether or not fear can persuade us. So, some examples in which messages have been curated to instill fear to persuade us to do something include like for smoking, impaired driving, seatbelts, cybersecurity, health campaigns. I have an example here from the 80s. These ran into the 90s. I remember seeing these on TV in the 90s. And messages do often try to motivate behavior by emphasizing a threat. Like if you don't change, something bad's going to happen. And so the hope is that it can capture your attention and increase motivation. But it's not enough. Being a having an effective fear appeal, it works best when people also believe, like, yes, there's something that I can do, and that action is actually going to work. So people have to feel as if there's a threat and there's something that they can do about it. But the other problem is that these strong threats, again, without a solution, can result in things like denial, defensiveness, just rejecting the message. Um, so you really have to make sure that a message like this, it shows that okay, the audience is going to be affected and that audience could do something about it. So like a weak message would be like skin cancer can kill you. Okay. A better one would be UV exposure increases risk, use SPF, seek shade, avoid peak exposure. So it shows the audience that they can do something about it. Reducing it to fear work, just to fear works, just doesn't necessarily work. Emotion can operate differently. It depends on the processing. So with the peripheral cue or deeper processing, if the issue is personally relevant, the fear might make the person pay attention to the evidence. So I'm just going to show this to you. This was the anti-drug campaign and your brain on drugs.
Okay, last time. This is drugs. Brain on drugs. Question?
Now, I remember seeing this and I was like 8 years old, so I really didn't get it. But it kind of goes to that ineffective fear campaign I was just talking about because okay, if I use drugs, drugs are going to fry my brain. I guess I just don't use them, but it did not say anything further. Um, it didn't necessarily even give solutions to the drug problem. It just said, okay, this was what happens. Kind of like saying skin cancer is bad. This is kind of like saying drugs are bad. So it was very limited, and I am kind of unsure as to how effective these were as well. But that was one that was based on fear. That was very popular. So, another way to do this, okay, when you're creating a message, should you mention the other side? So, should you have a one-sided or two-sided message? Should we just talk about how awesome our product is, or should we maybe say, okay, this is great, but this is one downside, just in case? Um, which one's going to be more persuasive? So the one-sided, it can work in when the audience already agrees, they don't have a ton of knowledge. There's really not going to be anybody that says anything otherwise. It's simple, it's clear, it's focused, and so we have this Trident ad because you can't chew deodorant, okay? And try in general, yeah, most people are going to agree like gum is going to make your breath smell better, and this just reinforces that. Two-sided is sometimes useful, okay, if there's an educated or knowledgeable audience, maybe there's a skeptical audience, there's an opposing view that's already familiar, and the audience is likely exposed later. And here's an example of this. I'm pretty sure this is some sort of medicine, and it's from a different generation that, okay, it works, but it tastes horrible. So this could be effective because the source, okay, this company, they're fair, they're honest, and it's trustworthy. They're telling us the truth that this is going to taste terrible, but it's going to work. And the thing about could be effective because they've already heard that this is taste bad, And they're going to find it out later anyways. So why not just tell them? So this is going to enhance the credibility of that source. Another example of this, a one-sided car salesperson. This car has excellent fuel economy and reliability. Awesome, whatever. Two-sided, okay, it costs more upfront than this model, but the maintenance costs have historically been lower. Honestly, that second one feels better because it feels more honest and it's more specific. I'm gonna trust that one more because you know that there's got to be a downside. Now, the two-sided message, it doesn't mean you have to list every criticism or concede the entire argument, but you have to acknowledge that there is a downside, and you can provide a response if you would like as well. So this brings us back to something, again, we've seen repeatedly, you can't understand persuasion without understanding who is receiving it. So, um, we might watch this. It depends if I can handle it. So, we if we bring again Hovland and the elaboration likelihood model together, the same message can affect people differently depending upon, okay, how personally important is this issue? If that's highly relevant, you can enhance the argument quality. If it's not very relevant, you can use source cues. You can use a famous person, you can use emotional appeal, you can use music. If they have prior knowledge, can they evaluate the evidence? If there's an existing attitude, okay, what do they already believe? If the message is close to the current attitude, it's easier to persuade. If they're very opposed to it, you might have to have some counter arguments. Those stronger attitudes are going to be harder to change, especially if they're linked to somebody's identity. Also, okay, attention. Are they distracted? Are they less able to use the central processing right now? And so they are going to rely more on cues. Is there a need for cognition? Do they want to think deeply right now? Now, I am going to play this. This is from the ASPCA. This is Sarah McLachlan in The Arms of an Angel, as I'm sure we've all seen. Now, this plays on a lot of cable television, TV sh or channels. It seems like it plays a lot on weekends. And when you're just watching TV on the weekends, you don't necessarily want to think a lot. You're just kind of mindlessly watching stuff. You're not wanting to read a bunch of statistics or things like that. And so this is a phenomenal example of using the peripheral route of persuasion because we have Sarah McLachlan's and we have a very emotional song, and then we have animals who need to be taken care of. And so it really hits on everything peripherally.
Hi, I'm Sarah McLachlan. Will you be an angel for a helpless animal? Every day, innocent animals are abused, beaten, and neglected, and they're crying out for help. Please, call the number on your screen with a monthly gift right now. For just $18 a month, only 60 cents a day, you'll help rescue animals from their abusers and provide medical care, food, shelter, and love. Call or join online in the next 30 minutes and you'll receive this welcome kit with the photo of an animal in the shelter right now. One who's been given a second chance. Thanks to you. Right now, there's an animal who needs you. Your call says, I'm here to help. Please call right now.
Okay, well, if that ad does not get you to donate your entire life savings to the ASPCA, nothing will. I would say that's an incredibly effective ad and one that I've watched for a majority of my life that is always emotionally effective. So we'll move from Miss McLaughlin to the application of this. And now, this is just something that you could do on your own if you would like. Again, if you were to create a persuasive message in regard to an anti-texting campaign, you would consider your source, again, your message, audience, and processing. And then again, we could do this in small groups, but what would be the most persuasive way to do this at your college? And I'm just going to leave that right now as is. And let's move to does this sound familiar? Okay. Which statement feels more believable? Feels is the case. A claim you're hearing for the first time or something you've heard over and over. Now, we might assume repetition only works because if everybody's saying it, maybe it's true. Okay, but the thing is, there's something more automatic that's happening, and familiarity itself can influence perceived truth. So it's not necessarily worth thinking about it. It's automatically happening, which we'll talk about here. And this is literally having advertisers repeat the same message over and over and over. And the reason is we're likely to remember it. It does become familiar. We start to recognize it. We remember the brand. And so repetition can affect more than memory here, because here's the thing, repeated memory or a repeated claim is easier to recognize. It's easier to process because it's already upstairs in our brain and it feels familiar. And our brains can sometimes use that feeling as information. We're not necessarily thinking, I've heard this 10 times, therefore it's true. It's just the processing feels easier. And so that familiarity can influence our judgment. And again, we go back to that automaticity from several weeks ago. We don't ask, why does this feel familiar? We just might simply experience like, yeah, this feels right. We're not thinking through any of the background on this. It's just like, yeah, this feels right. But you're not thinking it even feels like right. It just does. This is the illusory truth effect. Okay? Governments use this, advertisers use this, lots of entities use this. That's all I'm going to say. Okay. So there's a classic finding on this in that when participants encountered a statement over and over, they later evaluated the truth. The repeated statements were rated more true than the ones that they hadn't come across as much. That's what research has shown. Now, the thing about this is repetition does not mean evidence. Nothing necessarily changed. There was no more evidence, there was no more credibility, there was no more logic, there was only prior experience. So literally, like I just said, we encounter repetition everywhere today. Advertising, social media, politics, rumors, headlines, slogans, misinformation, social groups, gossip. Now, we're not blank slates. Knowledge matters. The source and the context matters, like we've talked about. But the thing is familiarity can bias what we perceive as true. It's not that if you repeat everything enough or anything enough that you're going to become to believe it. That goes a little too far. It's just that repetition can increase perceived truth. Okay? Going back to automaticity. Okay, there's a fast cue. That becomes familiar over time. And with that, there's low cognitive effort. It is efficient processing. Or the elaboration likelihood model that we just went through in regard to the peripheral processing. We don't carefully scrutinize evidence, and so familiarity can become a peripheral cue. So something can feel true because it's familiar, not because we remember evidence showing that it's true. But here's the thing, okay? So we've got this, and yes, there's a cartoon here too for you. Why would familiarity feel like truth? This is a processing fluency, uh, ease with which information is processed. Sorry. So a repeated statement. Okay. We can recognize the words and structure very easily. It requires less cognitive effort and it just feels smoother because we have heard it before. So the brain might misattribute that ease. So instead of saying that this is just easy because I've heard it before, the brain says, "Huh, this is believable because it's so easy." So the brain is misattributing it to truth instead of just saying, "Yeah, I've heard it before, so it's easy." Those are two very different things. Okay, here's an example. The first time, okay, people, and again, this is very untrue, just so we're clear here. Pretty sure I went over this in intro and screamed about it. I'll keep screaming about it. People only use 10% of their brains. They don't. But it's repeated in movies, social media, conversations, memes. I don't know. Everybody hears it over and over and over. And eventually, people are like, yeah, I've heard that somewhere. And so it must be true. And then they end up in my intro class and they're like, yeah, well, the people only use 10% of their brains. No, they don't. There's no evidence of that. You've just heard it over and over. So familiarity gets confused with evidence. So have you ever known something was true because you've heard it somewhere, but you couldn't remember where? I know I've done it. I'm like, yeah, this and this, but I heard it somewhere. That doesn't mean it's true. I don't know where I heard it. I heard it somewhere, probably several times. There's definitely a source memory issue there. So we might remember the claim better than where it came from, or whether the source was credible, or whether it was originally presented as false. And so this also goes back to memory in regard to the encoding process and then the recall process, in that we don't necessarily remember the entire situation, encounter, piece of information that we memorized. So here's the thing. When a claim feels familiar, ask, do I know this is true or do I just recognize it? So if repetition and other persuasive techniques can influence us without realizing it, can we somehow prepare people to resist persuasion? And the answer is yes. I actually use this technique as a oh boy, I cut part of this off. That's not great. As I use this as part of my dissertation, and it's inoculation therapy. It was created by McGuire. Um, and that, yes, we can psychologically vaccinate against persuasion. It has been found to be efficacious and create significant change, again, on average. So here's the thing. We can build resistance to persuasion. You think about it like a vaccine. Vaccines are efficacious in nature. They are. They are, they are, they are. So here's the way they work. Yes, there's a weakened threat. We warn people that there's going to be some sort of misinformation or a conspiracy theory or something. And so before they're even exposed to it, we talk about why that's not true. If we know there's going to be, for example, vaccine misinformation out there, or there's going to be talk of how um that Tylenol, the use of mothers using Tylenol during pregnancy is going to increase the chances of autism. Okay, if that's out there and I know it's out there, well, what I can do is collect data indicating that there is no evidence whatsoever indicating that there's any basis for that. There's no correlation whatsoever that's ever been proven. There's definitely no causation. And so we have the ability to pre-bunk that claim that is going to be out there. And so what you're doing there, you're generating cognitive antibodies. You've given the opportunity to defend before it's even happened. And what that does for people is it gives them the information right off the bat. And so when they come across those claims, they already have the evidence-based information already instilled upon them, and they can refute that. They'll have counter arguments. Now, it doesn't shield people from these opposite ideas because literally we're exposing them right off the bat to a weakened version before they're hit with that version that's from very powerful people. And so resistance can be strengthened by practicing resistance. Okay, so making it more concrete. Okie dokie. Yeah. Imagine teenage will eventually hear, yep, everyone your age vapes. Okay, so instead of avoiding that, because you're not going to avoid that, okay, we warn or educate people or educate teenagers that like you're probably going to hear the vaping something that everybody does. Okay, so you expose that you present the weak persuasive argument, but then you refute it, and that like most people don't vape, and the popularity doesn't determine its safety either. And so you can practice that and having them generate their own responses to it. And then later persuasion becomes easier to resist. So, and also this does not make people immune to all persuasion. It really doesn't. It just increases resistance under certain conditions. Um, Especially when people learn how to counter the persuasive challenge in that they've already been able to create their own counter arguments. And then they have the independent agency to use them if they so choose. Now, here's something on the other hand. We have Brehm and his reactance theory. This occurs when people perceive their freedom to choose as being threatened. And when this happens, they might become motivated to restore that freedom. So, you tell somebody you can't watch that movie. All right, you can think about parents like saying these things to kids, okay? You're not going to go out with him. You're not going to do this. You're not going to wear those clothes. You're not going to watch that movie. You know what happens? All those things become much more interesting. Or, again, the parent or whoever it is, you have to agree with me. And the reaction is, no, I don't. And so this isn't necessarily simple stubbornness. It's not. It's a perceived restriction of freedom. You're taking something away from me. And the harder you push, the harder somebody might push back. Especially when freedom matters. Let's talk, we're talking about teenagers. Freedom matters. The restriction feels illegitimate. Like, why would you do this to me? The language is highly controlling. You have to do this. And the person believes the choice should be theirs. They should have the ability to make these choices on their own. And it depends upon the language that is used. Like, there's a difference between you must stop doing this or hear the risk, but the decision is yours. With that second one, you're preserving their autonomy and agency, and you're potentially reducing reactance. And that second one is actually more persuasive. This is what's called the forbidden fruit effect. And when you do restrict something, it can actually increase the desirability of it. Think about these, like banned books. When you censor things, censor music, censor information, restrict certain products or content. Again, not always, but that restriction makes it attractive. And so, in regard to persuasion, it kind of creates a paradox. So, the persuader, more pressure, again, thinks they create more change, but sometimes more pressure creates more of a threat, and so more reactance and less persuasion. Potentially even a boomerang effect, which is when the attitude moves in the opposite intended direction. this kind of gets into obedience. And authority can increase compliance, but they can also produce reactance and resistance. So that authority does not result in automatic obedience. It depends on the legitimacy, freedom, context. So, if trying to persuade, try not to use controlling language, like you have no choice, or any intelligent person would agree, or you need to believe this. You need to acknowledge autonomy and offer reasons, allow evaluation, invite questions. People are a lot easier to persuade when they don't feel the persuasion is taking away their ability to make a choice. So, how can we change somebody's mind? How do we change somebody's mind? We come all the way back around here. It depends on who. Are they credible, experts, trustworthy, similar to us? What arguments are they making? How are they framing it? Are they using emotion? Are we repeating the information? Is the audience involved? Are they knowledgeable? What are their existing attitudes? Are they attending to the information? Are we using the central peripheral processing? And we can resist through preparation and possible freedom and autonomy. And so there's no single formula for persuasion, and the same message can affect different people in very, very different ways. And so, with that, we're going to stop. We're going to bring an end to this section, and then we'll come back and talk about what happens when the person persuading us is ourselves. And I will meet you back here for that.